Hello, it's me, everyone and everything. William Blake was a 19th century poet, painter, and engraver, and political radical. If you're familiar with Blake, it's probably because of his poem, The Tiger. You know the one, tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, that one. He did that. That was him. Early in childhood, Blake began to experience visions of powerful religious figures like angels or demons. God himself popped his head in William Blake's window and was like, "Yo, sup dude?" And thereafter he often described seeing beings of cosmic significance just hanging around in the world of the ordinary. He would see angels in a tree, for example. Now, it's difficult to sort out exactly what was happening to this dude. He kinda slips in and out of metaphor when he's discussing things, so like, when he describes the mills outside London as these fiery apocalyptic machines of hell, is he speaking literally? Did he literally see demons in those mills? Because he sometimes did literally see demons. Or, more likely, was he making a comment about the industrialization of London and its effects on the lives of the working poor? Or, as some scholars interpret it, a commentary on the authoritarianism of organized religion? Or was it some weird mixture of both? Did the textual contents of Blake's visions contain hidden symbolic meaning that was captured by his poetry? Blake did claim to have literal visions. He claimed he could commune with the dead and that archangels instructed him to create his poetry, which was very popular in heaven. This part was not a metaphor. He believed this. He believed sometimes Voltaire or Moses or Raphael, the artist, not the Ninja Turtle, would come and hang out with him. Now, maybe he was lying for whatever reason, but it's a pretty weird lie to make up and keep telling from the age of 4 throughout your entire life. Especially because it's not like he tried to parlay these visions into powerful positions of authority or leadership, because he held contempt for the very idea of imposing one's will on others. That probably wouldn't have worked anyway, because most people at the time just figured he was mad. He probably wouldn't have gotten anything out of lying like this, is my point. He was just a chill dude with an unusual brain, and we will very likely never know why his brain was the way that it was. Because he is dead, his brain isn't around to look at. Blake saw these visions as part of a cohesive, omnipresent alternate reality that overlapped with our own, but was invisible to everyone but him. He developed his own complicated mythology borrowing from a number of religious traditions. But at the same time, he was perfectly lucid, perfectly aware of his earthly surroundings. He would jump between these cosmological epics to treatises on the evils of child labor or slavery without missing a beat. This didn't pose a contradiction to him. He didn't view his spiritual world as separate from the physical world. So, to answer a question from before, were Blake's dark satanic mills metaphor or a literal representation of his visions? Likely wouldn't matter to him. He viewed symbolic truth and literal truth as more or less the same thing. He was highly skeptical of the emphasis that the Enlightenment placed on reason over passion, just as he was skeptical of the dualistic concept of the soul as separate from the body, believing instead that the body was merely the portion of the soul that ordinary people could perceive with their senses. He believed that the real soul was all, everything, an indivisible oneness that encompassed everything and always. This is God, and he was God, but so is Jesus, and so are you, and so am I, and so are Gallagher's 1 and 2, and so is every atom in the universe. The ancient poets animated all sensible objects with gods or geniuses, calling them by the names and adorning them with the properties of woods, rivers, mountains, lakes, cities, nations, and whatever their enlarged and numerous senses could perceive. And particularly, they studied the genius of each city and country, placing it under its mental deity, till a system was formed which some took advantage of and enslaved the vulgar by attempting to realize or abstract the mental deities from their objects. Thus began priesthood, choosing forms of worship from poetic tales, and at length they pronounced that the gods had ordered such things. Thus, men forgot that all deities reside in the human breast. Part 2. Holy shit, this is everywhere. Also, the previous section was part 1. I didn't mention it before, but it was part 1. This video has parts now. Blake didn't use the term, and quite honestly, I'm stretching his beliefs just a little bit to fit the story I'm telling, but this indivisible oneness is strikingly similar to what we would today call non-dualism. The belief in, or in some cases, experience of, reality as one transcendent, boundaryless essence. Non-dualism is an incredibly important concept in Eastern religion and philosophy, but it's found in cultures all over the world. I wouldn't be able to even scratch the surface of the enormity of what has been written on this subject and all of the beliefs that various different peoples have, but let me outline some of the greatest hits as I understand them, because keep in mind, People devote their entire lives to understanding even one of these concepts, and I'm just some jerk off doing cursory internet research, mostly on Wikipedia. Advaita Vedanta, which is literally just Sanskrit for non-duality, is a Hindu philosophy which believes that there is only one thing which is truly real. Hindus call this Brahman, an infinite, unchanging, boundaryless truth which experiences all of reality, including the subjective experience of every living thing, as a sort of illusion. Alan Watts, the guy I listen to when I want to fall asleep but also I want my mind absolutely fucked, compares this to a cosmic game of self-delusional hide and seek, where the infinite tricks itself into thinking its various things for funsies.
My metaphysics, let me be perfectly frank with you, are that there is the central self. You can call it God, you can call it anything you like, and it's all of us. It's playing all the parts of all beings whatsoever, everywhere and anywhere, and it's playing the game of hide and seek with itself. It gets lost, it gets involved in the farthest out adventures, but in the end, it always wakes up and comes back to itself.
Link in the description if you want to hear more. The Tao of Taoism, and just look, I'm simplifying quite a bit to say the least, is a flow or pattern of the universe of which all things are simply an emergent property, something which cannot be described but crucially can be experienced. Remember that. We'll be coming back to that later. If you've ever seen this symbol, that's the Yin Yang. It's meant to demonstrate how seemingly opposite things are mutually interdependent, how they are in fact the same thing. The duality they represent is in fact non-dual. It's non-dual. This aspect of non-dualism is very counterintuitive, so it's worth a little digression, I think. Take, for example, light and dark. Something which is very light will look dark in a lighter place, so light and dark are kind of context dependent on one another. Something can be light in one context but dark in another, meaning that everything is kind of light and dark at the same time. Or life and death. Life and death are surely the opposite of one another, right? Like, you can't be alive and dead at the same time, despite what's on my shirt. But on the other hand, everything that's alive is made up on some molecular scale of things that are not alive. If to be dead is to be not alive, then all of the atoms in your body are dead. But all of those atoms together are you, which is alive. So really, everything that is alive is also dead. All seemingly opposite things can be viewed in this way. There can be no up without down, no hot without cold, no rich without poor, no inside without outside. Everything depends on its opposite to define itself, to draw the boundaries of what is itself, like two sides of the same coin. And just don't worry if this all sounds like nonsense. It's not nonsense, but therefore also is nonsense. It's just that it's not just you, okay? These are very difficult ideas to conceptualize, and at the best of times I can kind of get it, I can approach getting it. Moving on, the concept of non-dualism in Buddhism is complicated and controversial. Every faith has a lot of denominations, but even picking out what one denomination of Buddhism believes regarding non-dualism is a tall order. Buddhists are not a monolith, no faith is. Some argue that the Buddha nature, which is a kind of like a state of mind that one acquires after reaching Buddhahood, represents a sort of non-dualist state of being. You see that you perceive everything as one. Mahayana Buddhism teaches that all phenomena are interdependent and merely perceived as separate. Everything is the way it is because of its relationship to everything else. However, non-dualism is by no means the consensus among Buddhists. It is hotly debated and contested. Neoplatonism teaches that there is a single universal source of all things known as the One, like Neo from The Matrix. You know what that means? The universe is a metaphor for being trans. Despite being old as shit and twice as boring, this had a profound effect on the mystic traditions of all three major Abrahamic faiths: Kabbalah in Judaism, Sufism in Islam, and the creatively named Christian mysticism in Christianity. These disciplines seek to understand the nature of God as an unchanging, infinite source of all things. God, in this understanding, is the irreducible and most real aspect of the universe. The latter two attempt to become one with the divine by various means, allowing the self to dissolve temporarily to join with this infinite, boundless oneness. The Wakan Tanka, Great Spirit or Great Mystery of Lakota spirituality, depending on who is asked, is either a group of celestial beings or a sort of animating force within everything. According to Lakota chief Luther Standing Bear, from Wakan Tanka, the Great Spirit, there came a great unifying life force that flowed in and through all things. The flowers of the plains, blowing winds, rocks, trees, birds, animals, and was the same force that had been breathed into the first man. Thus all things were kindred, and were brought together by the same great mystery. Now, in no way am I trying to suggest that any of these traditions are identical to one another. That would be as reductive as claiming that fundamentalist Christianity is the same thing as Zoroastrianism because both are monotheistic. The only way in which these things are the same thing is the way that everything is the same thing. Because that's what this thing is about. Hey everybody, a little secret about this particular joke. I wrote it after I'd taken my melatonin for the night. If you're wondering about that joke, that's why it's like that. It's interesting that this idea of the totality of the universe being one seems to occur to cultures all over the world. It just seems to be something about this idea that people find inherently pleasing or convincing. To me though, what's most interesting is the fact that a number of these traditions have developed methods to reliably induce an altered state of consciousness, in which a person can experience the universe this way, a seeming dissolution of the self, which allows one to experience, or at the very least, feel as though they are experiencing, a sense of oneness with the cosmos, boundaryless, infinite, ineffable. Those who experience this state often report that it felt realer than real. Chapter 3, don't try this at home. This state of consciousness can be achieved in many, many different ways. Through certain yoga practices, deep and skilled meditation, prayer, breathing exercises, fasting, sensory deprivation, ritualized injury, the list goes on. And also debatably through substantial doses of psychedelic drugs. Now, hold on a second. To say that drugs can induce a state of consciousness similar to a genuine mystical experience is controversial, to say the least. Others might use the word blasphemous. Religious leaders near unanimously reject the spiritual validity of this approach for a number of reasons. Some argue that a psychedelic experience is subjective and thus does not represent the objective truth of a genuine mystical experience. Others agree that the experience may be similar, but having the experience without the preparation their methodology provides is dangerous or counterproductive. It's worth noting here, however, that there is literally millennia of history of indigenous people using these compounds for religious purposes. So if your religion is, at least partially based around taking these drugs, then you're going to be less skeptical of their ability to induce a mystical experience. But back to the danger thing, yeah, it sure can be. It is a bad idea to get super high on drugs without precautions. I think we can all agree on that. That is not a controversial statement. It has the potential to seriously mess you up psychologically, or turn you into some sort of QAnon shaman. On the other hand, taken under certain conditions, these compounds have been shown to reliably induce the exact state of consciousness described by mystics and people of every background or faith. Which I realize now is a very ambiguously worded sentence. What I mean is that it induces it in people of every background or faith, not that the mystical experience of every background or faith is the same. Because as I said in part 2, they're not. It's all very complicated. What's more, people who have experienced this often consider it one of the most important experiences of their lives, reporting that it helped them come to profound realizations about their place in the world, or relieved their fear of death. Psychedelic drugs are so consistently good at this that many physicians and activists are pushing to have them reclassified as medical drugs specifically to help relieve dying patients' anxiety over death. Psychedelic users often refer to this state as ego death or ego loss, both of which are pretty bad names for it because obviously some element of the ego remains present if you are capable of observing any of it. And anyone who's been around people who have done too many drugs can tell you they definitely still have egos. Timothy Leary, perfect example by the way, and Ralph Metzner popularized this term in the book The Psychedelic Experience, in which they tried to map the psychedelic experience onto the Tibetan Book of the Dead in a weird hippie bullshit kind of cultural appropriation way. Aldous Huxley wrote about experiencing this in his book, The Doors of Perception, which, by the way, was named after a passage from William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. A follow-up essay often included in copies of The Doors of Perception, Heaven and Hell, is also named after this work by Blake. Huxley called this the mind at large and added a fun sci-fi twist by theorizing that the brain is capable at all times of experiencing the whole of reality, but that it naturally filters itself at all times of all of the information that is irrelevant to biological survival. Huxley, my dude, you just got real high, that's all. He wrote about looking at a flower and experienced the, quote, miracle of naked existence. That his sense of self was no longer present, and the experience was neither good nor bad, it simply was. So, okay, dozens of cultures, perhaps indeed most cultures, have this shared experience of the universe as an indivisible oneness, that all things are truly the same thing, and that the divisions between all are illusory and fleeting. This idea can be found in dozens of religious traditions, ancient and modern, and has even been observed by secular scientists and philosophers. Now, as up my own butt as I can sometimes get, I can't claim to understand the true nature of the universe. I do think, though, there's a strong case to be made that if this idea isn't just true in some fashion, then it's at least compelling enough that we can gain some sort of emotional or spiritual truth from it. So I ask you this, if we were all one with everything and everyone else, how would that change the way you behave? How would it change the way you think of other people, of the world, and our responsibilities to both? I'd like to close with a reading of William Blake's most celebrated poem, The Tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forest of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deep or skies burnt the fire of thine
eyes?
On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or
eyeball
dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Hello and welcome to the Eyeball Zone! Here in the Eyeball Zone, we frame the fearful symmetry of small content creators by putting eyeballs on their work. Blasegg's video, The Olympics Don't Deserve Skateboarding, combines two of my favorite things in the world, skateboarding and shitting on the Olympics. I thought this video would go in a very different direction than it ended up going. I thought it would be about like your standard criticisms of the Olympics, like the hits, you know, like how they bankrupt small communities and impose authoritarian control over the areas they end up being in. But no, this one's more about the way that the Olympics, or really professionalized competition of any kind, is incompatible with artistic mediums. So check it out. You get to see him do a bunch of skateboard tricks and fall down a couple times. It's good stuff. Hey, do you got some sort of small project that you want to have eyeballs on? Okay, fine. Send no more than one email to thoughtslimeeditor@gmail.com with the word eyeball somewhere in the description, and perhaps you too will find yourself trapped here in the eyeball zone. Hi there, it's you, Thought Slime, because we're all the same. Everything's the same. Press the like button, but really just by existing, you have already pressed the like button because the like button is one with all things. You can or not give money to my Patreon if you want to and have the means, but know that in doing so, you are giving money to all things and also not doing that, and everything's the same. An example of two things that are the same is this channel, and youtube.com/Scaredy Cats TV is also the same thing as this. They're the same thing. It's another example of non-duality there. Another way is the difference between YouTube videos and streams. It's seemingly opposite, but at the same time, you can find me streaming on Twitch and YouTube every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So explain that, duelists. It's time to duel.